along with that fourth turning book. And Oliver DeMille it's giving the class, and he talks about, going into a crisis, it's not really fun. It's not smooth sailing, but there's a lot to be optimistic about, because that's when things get fixed. Things that fell apart in all these generations, that's the time they get fixed. And it gets so bad, we get so far on the Tytler cycle, we get so far towards that bondage that people finally are compelled to go to the other side. And because of that, the crisis eras are when really strong things are built. So strong families, strong businesses, strong new governments. The Revolutionary War, the Civil War, World War II, these are crisis times, and it built some really powerful things that made society better. And so he's really optimistic that things can be better because we'll go through this crisis. And in the book, it talks about there's all these possibilities of what could happen. The book was in '98, so it was before the crisis started. But now we've had that, and I looked at his blog. He says, according to his view of the cycles, 2008 with the recession starting was the catalyst for the crisis. So according to what he says, the author, that we're in that crisis era now, but we're still in the fairly early stages. So it's been 5 years. It'll probably be between 20 and 25 years if it follows the pattern. And so these are the kinds of things we can expect.
Crisis climax to come.
Yeah, so we're definitely still going
we're not
towards
unraveling, we're in the crisis.
Yeah, we are in the crisis
and
now.
And we're heading towards greater crisis.
Yeah, and I kind of think the way, we're getting propped up more and more. We're not falling, but it's more and more artificial that's making us not crash, and it's going to make the crash seem worse, I think. But I think it's when we get to that climax where we realize that, oh no, our whole society is not working at all, and all of a sudden we can't pretend, then some new things are going to come. It's probably not going to be the end of the world. It could be, but it's probably not. Yeah. And so something else will come. And
there could be different outcomes, and they could be good or bad, really.
That's something that I find really interesting that I keep going back to in my mind about this cycle in the Book of Mormon, is that each time that they were called to repent, it was always the same thing. Look forward to the coming of Christ, and we keep thinking, we're in the last days, Christ is going to come. And I hear so many people saying things like, well, that's just the way it's, the Lord has told us that's what's going to happen. And they're all sitting back waiting for it to happen. And I keep saying, but if you look at the Book of Mormon, that cycle happened so many times before he actually came. Yeah. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
How do you know this is the last cycle?
Yeah.
There's so much more. And we're not supposed to sit back and go, well, that's the way it is. He tells us we're supposed to get out there and fight it and influence for liberty and good. And so that's always a question in my mind, Okay, so how many more times do we have to do this? But it's also a hope.
Yes.
Like you're talking about.
Yes.
He's so positive about this because there's good potential in it. Because we know we can change. Society can become better again. We don't have to just wait until he comes. It's going to get, we know it's going to get horrible before he comes. Yeah. But we don't know if that's now or not.
Yeah.
We could go through 3 more cycles before.
Yeah.
Who knows?
And he says, in the book, he talks a lot about a lot of people right now think linearly. They just think time follows time, and we're just going in a straight line, and so if it's getting worse, it's going to stay getting worse.
Oh, yeah.
But really, we keep going through those cycles. So if we think, well, in 20 years, my kids are going to be experiencing what I'm experiencing now. No, because world's going to be different in 20 years because we're in a whole different era. It'll be more like 80 years ago than it is like now, at that time period. And so thinking in terms of cycles, I think, makes it more clear that we're not just on this path. We're around and around and around, and there's good and bad in each part. We're moving some ways better and some ways worse.
Does he talk about technology in these cycles?
What does he talk about with technology?
Because that's
a little bit.
That's what scares me, is I feel like our kids are so dependent on technology, and when everything falls apart, everything is going to fall apart. and they're not gonna have the conveniences that have always been there.
Yeah.
And so
Oliver DeMille talks about it more. In the book, it doesn't talk about it as much because it was in '98. There was plenty of technology going on then,
But
but
the internet was just bursting.
yeah,
It was just
yeah.
coming out of the shop.
But Oliver DeMille talks about, in fact, the thing I was listening to today that he talked about is that our society is moving from, he talks about cycles in history and the trends that we're going through and how trends grow and then climax and then decrease. And so they're kind of more triangular where cycles are round. And he talks about a lot of different trends and where we are in them. And he said one of the trends that we're moving away from the written word culture to a visual culture. And that's an interesting one. And what he was saying today that I was listening to was that if you want to really have influence, you're going to need to be well versed in both. Because the elite are going to know the written culture. They're going to continue being really well educated. And the masses are going to be more and more on this visual culture. And so that was kind of related to the technology, to social media. And I thought it was fascinating.
Yeah, I feel in some ways like the older generation, I feel like I'm still with it as far as technology goes, but I am just digging in my heels about the social media. Yeah. I just have not been able to make myself do any of that. And I know there's a lot that I'm missing out on one side, but I'm kind of like you as far as choosing what I use my time for, and I just think that could chew up so much of my time because I know how bad I am about email and the internet already. If I had Facebook to go with it, I think I would just never get up out of the chair.
I know. That's exactly how I feel too.
And so I haven't even gone there. Yeah. None of us have Facebook accounts. Except my daughter, who's moved on to college and is doing her own thing. And she chose to do that.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering, what they have to say about that. And I probably do need to.
I'll be honest, in a college life today, you would go to ward activity. You wouldn't show up, for one, you wouldn't show up at the ward activity because you wouldn't know about it if you weren't on Facebook. For two, you show up if you do happen to find out about it, and everyone would be talking about stuff that you have no clue about because it all happened on Facebook. There's so much interaction there. So much.
And that frightens me.
And we can
I
see
think things happen so quickly because of Facebook. I don't know. There's a lot of it that, with every technology, Satan has found a way to use it, but it's helped the Lord's work as well.
Yeah.
And so I need to move into that, but I'm afraid of being able to keep Satan out.
Yeah. Well, and I think from what I am learning, that's going to be a part of things. That's going to be a part of the crisis. That's going to be this generation that's young adults right now coming into young adults. It's a hero archetype according to the book. This millennial generation like Landon and most of your kids that are in this generation, that's what they know. That's going to be how they're building. That's going to be really relevant to how society is built in this